My brother called to brag about the reservation. "Got us into Hartwell's for Danny's engagement party," he said, his voice carrying that particular pride he reserved for impressing our parents. 2-hour wait list. Cost me some serious favors just to get in the door. I set down my coffee and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. The restaurant floor below was still dark at 8 in the morning, chairs upturned on polished marble tables, the kitchen crew doing their first prep runs for dinner service. "Sounds like a great choice," I said. "I'm sure you'll love it." He had no idea he was talking to the owner. "I'm Elena Hartwell, 32 years old, and I run a restaurant group that most people in this industry consider one of the most exciting culinary stories of the last decade. 3 concepts, 2 states, a Michelin star we earned 18 months after opening, and a 4th location under construction in Chicago. My name is literally above the door, and my own family had been dining here for 2 years without once asking if the Elena Hartwell on the menu was their daughter and sister. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to hide your success just to keep the peace with your own family, hit that subscribe button because this story is for you." Growing up in a working-class neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio, food was never about pleasure in our house. It was fuel. My mother cooked to feed 4 kids on a budget that left no room for anything except practical. My father worked 22 years in a manufacturing plant and had the particular suspicion of anything that seemed frivolous that a man like him earns through hard work and limited options. Restaurants were where you went on birthdays if someone else was paying. They were not careers. They were definitely not something a smart girl built her life around. My brother Marcus was the obvious success story. Pre-law at Ohio State, then law school, then a position at a firm in Cincinnati that my parents described to anyone who would listen with a reverence usually reserved for religious figures. My younger sister Danielle followed a safer path into accounting, and then there was me, the one who spent every weekend of high school staging at every restaurant in a 30-mile radius that would have me, washing dishes and peeling vegetables and watching line cooks work, with a focus that felt more like watching artists than employees. When I told my parents I'd been accepted to the Culinary Institute of America, my father didn't speak to me for 3 days. Not out of cruelty exactly. More like genuine incomprehension, as if I'd announced I was joining the circus. "You have the grades to do anything," he finally said on the 4th day, sitting at the kitchen table with the particular stillness of a man choosing words carefully. "And you want to wash dishes for a living." I tried to explain the difference between cooking and ownership, between working in a restaurant and building one. He heard none of it. My mother cried, which was worse than the silence. She kept saying she just wanted me to have security, which I understood even then was a real and legitimate fear. But understanding someone's fear and letting it become your ceiling are 2 different things. They did not come to my graduation from the CIA. My father had a shift he couldn't miss, which I always suspected was partially true and partially an excuse. My mother sent a card with a grocery store gift card inside and a note that said she loved me and hoped I'd find something stable soon. I kept that card for years, not out of sentimentality, more like documentation. My first real position after graduation was as a junior line cook at a well-regarded contemporary American restaurant in New York City. The pay was so bad I shared a bedroom with a pastry cook from Portland, and we slept in shifts for the first 3 months until she found a slightly better situation. I worked 14-hour days in a kitchen where the executive chef communicated primarily through controlled rage, and the only praise you ever received was the absence of criticism. I loved every second of it. What I was building wasn't a collection of techniques. I was building a philosophy. Every restaurant I worked in, I watched not just how the food was made, but how the entire experience was constructed. How a guest's mood shifted the moment they walked through the door. How a server's energy could either relax a table or make it feel rushed. How the relationship between the kitchen and the front of house was either symbiotic or quietly toxic, and how that relationship showed up in the food whether the chef admitted it or not. I was taking notes, constantly. My parents' opinions during those years arrived in the form of loaded questions during holiday calls. "Are you still doing the cooking thing?" my father would ask, in the same tone someone might use to ask if you were still seeing a person they'd never approved of. My mother would follow up with updates about Marcus's latest promotion, Danielle's new apartment, other people's children's medical school acceptances. The subtext was never subtle. You are behind. You are wasting your potential. You are ours, and we do not understand you. I stopped calling home as often after my 27th birthday, which I spent alone in my apartment after my sous chef position at a James Beard Award-nominated restaurant in Brooklyn fell through because of a sudden ownership change. It was the lowest I'd been professionally, and I made the mistake of calling home and explaining the situation. My father's response was measured and practical and devastating. Maybe this is a sign that it's time to consider something more realistic. I hung up and started writing the business plan I'd been sketching in notebooks for 3 years. The concept was simple in its clarity. A mid-sized restaurant in an underserved neighborhood in Columbus. Not the suburbs with their chains and parking lots, but the actual city. The kind of block that had been overlooked long enough that the rents were still accessible and the community was hungry for something that took them seriously. Contemporary American cooking built on regional ingredients, a staff culture that prioritized dignity and development, a price point that was honest rather than theatrical. I had a mentor from my New York days, a woman named Frances who had built and sold 2 successful restaurant groups before turning 60, and who had told me years earlier that when I was ready, she wanted to be my first call. I made that call on a rainy Tuesday in November. 2 months later, we were in business together. Hartwell's opened on a Thursday in April with 42 seats, a 6-person kitchen team, and a front-of-house staff that I had personally interviewed and trained for 6 weeks before we served the single paying guest. I had not told my family we were opening. I told myself it was because I didn't want the pressure of their skepticism clouding what should have been a clean launch. The truth was simpler. I couldn't afford to have them there saying the wrong thing to the wrong person on a night that mattered so much. The first 3 months were the kind of difficult that doesn't make for good storytelling. Slow nights, equipment failures, a dishwasher who quit without notice during a full Saturday service, a review from a local food blog that was positive but buried on page 4 of a Google search. Frances kept telling me this was normal, that restaurants don't announce themselves, they accumulate. I believed her. I also barely slept. And then a critic from a national food publication came in on a Wednesday in late July, sat at the bar, ordered 9 courses, and wrote 800 words about us that ran the following month under the headline, "The most exciting new restaurant in Columbus and almost nobody knows it." Within a week, we had a 6-week wait list. Within 3 months, we were fully committed through the end of the year. I called my parents. I don't know exactly what I expected. My mother said it sounded very nice and asked if the hours were still as hard as they used to be. My father said that was good news and then spent most of the call telling me about Marcus's new house in Hyde Park. I told myself it didn't matter. I was lying, but I was getting better at the lie. The next 4 years moved fast in the way that growth moves when you've stopped waiting for permission. A second location in a renovated building in the short north, a partnership with a small wine importer in the Finger Lakes that became a defining part of our identity. A James Beard nomination that we didn't win but that put my name in conversations I'd been trying to enter for a decade. The Michelin star came on a morning when I was doing prep work in the Columbus kitchen and my phone started ringing from numbers I didn't recognize. Frances called right after. She said, "I told you," and I could hear her crying, which made me cry, which was embarrassing for both of us in the best possible way. None of this, not the star, not the second location, not the national press, seemed to reach my family. Marcus knew I owned a restaurant, in the vague way you know a relative does something in a field you don't track. Danielle had been to Hartwell's once, for her friend's birthday, years before she made the connection that her sister owned the place. She texted me afterwards saying the salmon was great and the service was warm. She did not ask how I built the place or what it had taken or whether I was happy. My parents had never visited at all. I had stopped trying to bridge that gap. Instead, I poured every bit of what I needed to feel from them into the philosophy of the restaurants themselves. The way we trained our servers to actually listen when a guest described an allergy or a preference. The way I insisted every new kitchen hire spend a week in the front of house before they ever touched a stove, so they understood that the people serving the food were not beneath them, but essential to them. Every standard I set was, in some way, I didn't fully examine at the time, about making people feel seen in a way I never quite was at home. The call from Marcus came on a Monday morning 6 months ago. He was getting married. His girlfriend of 3 years, a corporate attorney named Priya, had said yes over the weekend, and the family wanted to celebrate at a proper dinner. He'd managed to get a reservation at Hartwell's. He delivered this last piece of information with the pride of someone who'd pulled strings, called in a favor, navigated a difficult system. I had approved the reservation myself the previous Friday when our events manager flagged it as a high-profile booking under the name Marcus Dolan, Party of 8. I said congratulations and I meant it. Marcus and I had a relationship that functioned on the surface. Birthday texts, holiday calls, the occasional genuine moment buried inside years of careful avoidance of anything real. Priya. I'd met once at a cousin's wedding and liked immediately. She had a directness I respected and a warmth that seemed to balance Marcus's tendency toward performance. What I didn't know yet was what was coming. The reservation was for a Friday. I was planning to be present at the restaurant that night anyway, handling a supply chain issue with our produce vendor that had been dragging on for 2 weeks. I mentioned nothing to Marcus about owning the place. I told myself I'd see how the evening went, let them experience the restaurant as regular guests, and then reveal the connection at the end of the night as a pleasant surprise. That plan lasted until about 40 minutes after they arrived. I was watching the dining room from a small monitor in my office when I saw them walk in. Marcus in a blazer, Priya radiant and visibly happy. My parents in their usual presentation of careful Sunday best formality that always looked slightly stiff in spaces that weren't built for them. My father surveying the room with the expression of a man calculating whether the prices were justified. My mother touching the tablecloth and whispering something to my father that I could see but not hear. My front of house manager, a young woman named Sasha who had been with me since the 2nd year, greeted them and walked them to the corner table we'd held for the occasion. I watched them settle. I watched Sasha present menus with the particular warmth she brought to every table. I watched my father glance at the menu, then say something to Sasha that made her smile tighten slightly before she nodded and walked toward the kitchen. She knocked on my office door 2 minutes later. Your family's table just flagged a few special requests. Your father wants to know if the chef can do a steak simply grilled, nothing on it, no sauce, very plain. Not on the menu. He also asked what the corkage fee is because they're thinking of bringing their own wine next time. I almost laughed. Tell him we can absolutely accommodate the steak. Corkage is 30, but let's not start that conversation tonight. The first hour went relatively smoothly. I watched them eat. Watched Priya and Marcus lean close over the small plates we sent out. Watched my mother touch my father's arm when his second course arrived and even his most skeptical expression softened. These were people who did not give praise easily, but food is honest in a way that even resistance can't fully survive. And then the wine situation happened. Our sommelier, a 30-year-old named Thomas who had come to us after 6 years at a 2-star restaurant in San Francisco, was presenting the wine program to the table when my father interrupted him. I could see the exchange clearly on the monitor. Thomas gesturing toward the list with his usual patient grace. My father shaking his head, my father pointing at the prices, my father's expression shifting into something I recognize from childhood. The particular look of a man who has decided he is being taken advantage of. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see Thomas's posture shift. He was maintaining his composure. He had been trained to maintain his composure. But I could see what it cost him. Sasha came back to my office. Your father told Thomas the wine list is a joke for the price, that he could get the same bottles at a grocery store for 1/3 of the cost, and that the markup here is criminal. She paused. Thomas handled it perfectly. But I wanted you to know. I stood up. Get Marcus on the phone and tell him I need 5 minutes in the private dining room. Don't tell him why yet. Marcus was visibly confused and mildly irritated when Sasha brought him back. He was dressed well, carrying the ease of a man having a good evening before being interrupted. He looked around the private dining room with its softer lighting and single long table and said, "What's the problem? We're in the middle of dinner." "I need to tell you something before the rest of the night happens," I said. "There's no crisis. But there's something you should have known before tonight and I should have told you." He looked at me. I looked back at him. "I own this restaurant, Marcus. Hartwell's is mine. I founded it 6 years ago. The second location in Short North is mine too. We have a Michelin star. Our third location is opening in Chicago in 8 months. When you called me Monday to tell me about the reservation, you were calling me to tell me you'd gotten a table at my restaurant. The silence that followed was the specific silence of someone whose understanding of a situation has just been structurally revised. He sat down in one of the private dining chairs. He looked at the room around him the way you look at something familiar that has suddenly revealed itself to be something else entirely. Why didn't you tell us? I've been in the national press 6 times in 4 years. There was a piece in Food and Wine 2 years ago with my photo on the cover of the regional edition. The James Beard nomination was covered by the Columbus Dispatch. I kept my voice level. I still been announcing things to the family a long time ago because announcing things to the family meant having my father change the subject to your career or mom asking if I'd thought about teaching cooking classes instead. He opened his mouth and closed it again. For a moment, under the surface of the business-polished exterior, I saw my actual brother. The one who used to build elaborate forts with me in the backyard before everything became about performance and comparison. Dad just said something to your wine guy, he said quietly. I know. That's partly why I'm having this conversation now instead of later. How bad was it? Thomas is a professional. He handled it, but he shouldn't have to handle that. Marcus looked at the table. I'll talk to him. I'd appreciate that. But Marcus, I need to go back out there, and I need to think about whether to tell Mom and Dad tonight or let the evening finish first. What do you think? He was quiet for a moment. Tell them. If they find out you knew and waited, Dad will make that the issue instead of everything else. It was, I realized, genuinely good advice. We walked back to the table together. My parents looked up with the mild concern of people unsure whether something is wrong. Priya looked at my face and seemed to understand that something significant was happening. My mother said, "Is everything all right?" I sat down in the empty chair that Sasha had quietly added to the table. I looked at my parents across the clean white linen and the half-finished plates and the wine glasses Thomas had filled with a bottle we'd comped for the table without explanation. I need to tell you both something, I said. Hartwell's is my restaurant. I own it. I've owned it for 6 years. The reason my name is on the menu is because it's named for me. My mother's face went through something complicated. My father went very still. I don't understand, my mother said. You own this entire place? This location, the one in Short North. And we're building a third. Yes. My father said nothing. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not the dismissal I was used to. Something more like recalibration. You have a Michelin star, Priya said from across the table, her voice quiet and precise. I read about this restaurant when Marcus made the reservation. I read about the Michelin star. I read about the James Beard nomination. She looked at Marcus. Did you know? Marcus shook his head. Elena. My father set down his fork. You have been aware that we were planning this dinner here in your restaurant and said nothing. That's correct. Why? And here was the moment I had rehearsed in my head for years in various forms. The confrontation that always played out differently in the imagining than in the reality of 2 parents sitting across from you at a table you own, in a room you built, surrounded by a staff you trained. Every surface and plate and glass and light fixture the result of choices you made alone because no one in your family had ever asked. Because I wanted you to experience what I built before you knew it was mine, I said. Because every other time I've shared something I've accomplished, one of 2 things happens. Either the conversation immediately moves to something Marcus or Danielle has done, or I get a question about whether this is really something I want to do long term. I wanted you to sit in this room and taste this food and feel this service and have an opinion about it based on what it actually is, not filtered through the fact that I made it. My mother looked down at her plate. My father was quiet in a way that felt different from his usual quiet, which was the quiet of someone choosing not to engage. This was the quiet of someone actually listening. The wine list, he said finally. Yes. He didn't look at me. He looked at the empty space near the table where Thomas had been standing. I didn't know it was your operation. Would that have changed how you spoke to him? A long pause. Yes. He's been with me 4 years. He left a 2-star restaurant in San Francisco because he believed in what we were building. Every person on this floor has a story like that. I kept my voice even. This was not a speech I had prepared, and I was being careful not to let it become a performance. They deserve to be treated with basic respect regardless of who owns the place. My father looked at Marcus and then back at me. There was something in his face that I had almost never seen there, a genuine discomfort that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with recognition of a specific failure. Danielle, who had arrived late and slipped into a seat beside Marcus during the last few minutes, had been listening silently. She spoke now. "You have a Michelin star, Elena." Her voice was soft. A Michelin star. 18 months after we opened. "Why didn't you tell me? I sent you the press release. To your email." She blinked. Something moved across her face. "I didn't open it. I thought it was about the restaurant where you were working." The specificity of that landed on all of us at the same moment. I had sent the press release. She had not opened it. Not because she didn't care exactly, but because she had never updated the story she was telling herself about who her sister was and what her sister did, and so an email about a restaurant didn't register as news about me. My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hand was cool and dry and familiar in the way that only a parent's touch is familiar. "We should have paid more attention," she said. I know we should have. She was not wrong. She was also saying it, in the way people say things when they are beginning to understand something without yet being able to fully face it. I appreciated the gesture even as I recognized its limits. My father called Thomas over to the table himself. He did it with the stiffness of a man doing something that did not come naturally and had decided to do it anyway. He said he owed Thomas an apology for the remarks about the wine list, that it was out of line, and that the dinner had been outstanding. Thomas accepted with grace, because Thomas was that kind of person, and because I had built the kind of team that was that kind of people. After they left that night, my parents walked through the restaurant differently than they had walked in. My mother stopped to look at the framed letter from the Michelin guide on the wall near the host stand. The letter I'd hung there because a mentor had told me I should mark the moments, and I'd listened. She read it twice. My father touched the edge of the bar as they passed, a small gesture, the kind you make when you're trying to feel something solid. Marcus hung back while Priya and my parents got their coats. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been doing that thing where I just assume I know what your life looks like without actually checking." "You have?" I agreed. "Are we okay?" I looked at my brother, the man who had been my competition since we were children, not by his choice exactly, not entirely by mine, mostly by the design of parents who had sorted us into categories before we were old enough to sort ourselves. "We're going to be okay," I said. "But I need you to actually show up. Not just at the restaurant. Actually show up." He nodded. It wasn't a speech. It was a commitment of the quiet kind. The kind that either holds or doesn't. The next morning, I arrived at the restaurant at 7 to find a voicemail from my father. He had left it at 11:15 the previous night. His voice had the careful quality of someone recording themselves and not entirely sure how to do it. He said the dinner was the best meal he had eaten in his life. He said he hadn't known and he should have known, and that he recognized there was a difference between not knowing and not looking, and that he had been doing the latter for years. He said he was proud of me. He said it simply, without decoration, the way my father said anything that cost him something real. I listened to it twice in the parking lot. That night, I sat in my empty dining room after the last service. Lights low, the room quiet in that particular way that restaurants have after closing, a specific hush that feels earned. I thought about what it had taken to build this. The years of silence from people I'd wanted to hear from. The choice to keep building anyway. To pour the hurt into the craft instead of letting it curdle. The staff I'd assembled, one by one. People who had taught me as much as I'd taught them. Who had made the place what it was on nights when I was running on 4 hours of sleep and pure will. My parents came to brunch the following Sunday. My father ordered off the menu. He asked about the sourcing of the eggs. He was genuinely curious, which was strange to witness in a man who had spent 20 years not being curious about what I did. My mother cried a little when she saw my photo on the wall, the one from the food and wine piece, and then composed herself and apologized for crying. It was not a full reconciliation. Those do not happen over one brunch. There were years of distance to navigate, patterns of conversation we had all settled into that did not dissolve because of a single honest dinner. My father still moved toward Marcus at family gatherings with an ease he had to consciously work to replicate with me. My mother still sometimes defaulted to questions about my personal life when conversation about my professional life made her uncertain, as if one compensated for the other. But they came. They asked questions. They listened to the answers. Danielle became my most devoted regular. She brought her partner for their anniversary. She brought her friends. She called me on a Thursday to ask if she could tour the kitchen, just to see it, just to understand. I gave her the tour myself. Watching my sister see the walk-in cooler and the line and the pastry station and my kitchen team moving with the coordinated focus of people who had been doing this long enough to stop thinking about it. Watching her face as she understood for the first time the actual scope of what I'd built was one of the quieter and more complete satisfactions of the last several years. Marcus and Priya set their wedding date for next fall. They asked to hold the rehearsal dinner at Hartwell's. I still remember the casual small shrug, as she handed me casual sort new about family and love. Not because I was still performing for an audience that had withheld approval for years. Because this was my house, and these were my people in all their complicated imperfect human reality, and that was worth something. The Chicago location opens in 4 months. My father has already asked if he can be there for opening night. My mother asked if she could bring her friend who used to watch cooking shows with her when we were small. The same friend who had told her years ago that her daughter was going to do something remarkable in food. And my mother had laughed it off. I told her to bring whoever she wanted. I still remembered acted with how that diverting in love. As Chicago 2 weeks ago, concrete dust on my shoes, drawings spread on a folding table, and thought about the girl who had spent high school washing dishes in other people's kitchens and taken notes in a spiral notebook about what she wanted to build someday. She had wanted someone to believe in her so badly that she had built an entire empire trying to manufacture that belief out of achievement. What I know now, standing in the shell of my 4th restaurant, is that the building happened because of her drive. But the meaning of it changed when I stopped needing anyone to witness it in order for it to be real. My success is not a message to anyone. It is simply mine. If your family has ever made you feel like the path you chose needed defending, I want you to know that the path either leads somewhere or it doesn't. And other people's belief does not determine which one it is. You do. If this story reached you somewhere you needed to be reached, please leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to Steal Revenge, where every story is about the strength it takes to become who you were always meant to be on your own terms. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.